Appreciate that. So these two gentlemen you all know well, but you probably don't know me. So I'll introduce myself first and then introduce our two congressmen. I'm Monty Heins. I work for the Dow Chemical Company, and I'm also currently the chairman of the East Harris County Manufacturers Association. And you heard this morning on several occasions, and both this afternoon as well, from a number of the speakers about how proud we are about our industrial region and how thankful we can be for the growth that we've seen. And that appreciation and pride is also very much bestowed on these two statesmen that I'm about to introduce and have a nice conversation with as we look ahead. Election season coming up and what these congressmen are working on. Both Congressman Gene Green and Brian Babin are tremendous champions for our industry and for our most important asset, our people, the community's employees that make it all happen each and every day. So we are very, very honored to have them here today, and also the opportunity for me to interview them, if you will, with some questions and answers. Allow me to give a brief bio for both of the congressmen. I'll start with Congressman Green. He was first elected to Congress for the 29th Congressional District of Texas in 1992, after 20 years in the Texas House of Reps and the Texas Senate. In 1996, he was appointed to the U.S. House Energy and Commerce Committee, which he continues to serve on today. For the 114th Congress, he is the ranking member for the Subcommittee on Health and also a member of the subcommittees on Energy and Power, Environment and Economy, and Oversight and Investigations. Within the House of Representatives, Representative Green has been a champion for health, energy, education, labor, domestic manufacturing, and preserving Social Security and veterans benefits. He has worked hard to improve the access to quality health care, support initiatives to improve our economy and job training, and maintain financial aid for students. Representative Green has been instrumental in securing federal funds for the expansion of the Port of Houston, which Roger also mentioned earlier, and Houston Metro's light rail, supporting the expansion of community health centers in the Houston area, and pushing legislation to declare the Buffalo Bayou a national heritage area. Congressman Brian Babin was sworn into the 114th Congress on January 6 of 2016 as a lifelong resident of lifelong resident of East Texas. He proudly serves the people of Texas's 36th Congressional District. He has served his community as a mayor, a city councilman, and a school board member. He also served as director of the Tyler County Chamber of Commerce. In 1999, he was appointed by then Governor Bush to serve on the Lower Neches Valley Authority and was reappointed by Governor Perry. Elected to Congress in 2014 and sworn in on the 6th of January 2015, Congressman Babin serves on the House Transportation Committee and the House Science Committee. These assignments provide him a critical platform to serve the economic needs of the 36th Congressional District, home of NASA's Johnson Space Center, 4 deep water ports, and many petrochemical and refinery complexes. Congressman Babin was appointed the chairman of the House Space Subcommittee with legislative jurisdiction and congressional oversight authority over all U.S. national space policy matters, including NASA and space commercialization. So, welcome and thank you both for being here today. For the audience, I have some questions that were collected from a number of you for both of the congressmen, and I'm going to go through those. We have about, about 35 or 40 minutes. So I've got far more questions than we have time. Hopefully, if you have a specific question, if they have a few minutes afterwards, you can grab them and ask your question. So I'm going to start with Congressman Green. You have been a steadfast advocate for the Port of Houston. So let me start with a couple of port-related questions. As you know, the fiscal year 2017 Energy and Water Appropriations Bill and the Water Resources Reform and Development Act, wow, that's a mouthful, are important legislation that provides funding for the Houston Ship Channel. What is the status of the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, and how will it help the Port of Houston?
Well, the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, we haven't passed anything into law yet, and the Senate hadn't taken up any of the appropriations bills. It won't help the Port of Houston as much as I want to. Typically, the port, just on maintenance dredging, can justify $60 to $70 million annually. We typically get $30, $31, $32 million. So the port has to cost benefit it. They have to prioritize, which is not good because we need to make sure that we're down to the current level of 45 foot where we're supposed to be. And of course, in the future, we want to go to 50 foot so we can be competitive with other ports that are trying to do the same thing. So the appropriations bill hasn't passed, but I think we got like 31 million, 32 million this time. But again, when you ask for 50 or 60 or 70, I'm not going to turn down 30 million, but I'd sure like to have more.
If I recall, you helped lead some changes to the Water Resources Development Act that will benefit the Port of Houston. Tell us about that act and what the benefit will be.
Well, and Congressman Babin, we share the Port of Houston, and he's on Transportation Committee, and they will be doing another Water Resources Development Act coming up. We need to tee up our efforts to make sure the Port of Houston gets those authorized, because then we go back and ask the appropriators for the money. But one of the issues we dealt with this last Congress was the Bayport flare, that it was off the container port there at Barber's Cut, where the ships were having to swing out into the middle of the channel to get in there. Brian and I worked last year very quickly to get language into the House Energy and Water bill to make sure the Corps of Engineers knew they had the authority to give that permit. And it didn't get through the Senate, but lo and behold, the Corps of Engineers suddenly found out that they did have the authority to do it. And if they don't do it, then we'll put that back in the bill again this year when we see what we need to do with it. So, but again, expansion of the port ultimately, but also just keeping us maintained our dredging to the 45 foot is a challenge that we're not getting enough federal funds for.
Thank you. Congressman Babin, thank you for introducing the amendment to the Federal Aviation Authority. That's a reauthorization act as well to set strict new guidelines for the operation of drones near chemical plants and oil refineries. Can you explain the bill and your support for that?
I sure can. Thank you, Monty. And it's a great pleasure to be here today. It's unbelievable how fast this last year has gone by when we had this a year ago. But yes, we were very fortunate to get this language into the FAA bill. With more petrochemical refining facilities than any other district in the United States, we felt that it was absolutely necessary that we get a handle on drones. And this new drone language specifies that in order to preserve our national security and to preserve the security from economic espionage or radical, maybe possible groups like, well, I'm not going to name names, but radical environmental groups that might want to come and fly a drone over a facility, we felt like that it was necessary to have this in law to prevent unauthorized drone use over critical infrastructure. And so that's what this bill is going to do. It's not going to prevent the owners and the company, the industries themselves from flying drones over their own facilities, or to prevent someone that has permission and a permit from you to fly over. But it does prevent unauthorized use of drones, and we felt like it was something that was necessary. We worked with the American Chemistry Council on this issue, and we were very fortunate to get it into law. It's signed into law.
And as an operations manager for many of the chemical plants in my company, we certainly appreciate that, both from a safety standpoint, security standpoint, intellectual property as well, because
Yes,
that's an important piece of it. And we do find good use for drones with that language to go do things like inspecting some of our equipment that's high up in the air. and we don't have to spend as much to do that by building scaffolds to be able to do that. So
We actually had so much flooding back in March in the east side of my district. I have 9 counties, and Newton County, Jasper, Newton, and Orange counties had historic flooding. It was a 500-year flood, and we had drone usage there that gave us some excellent video footage of just how horrible it was. It rivals what's going on in Baton Rouge right now, but the lucky thing was that it's not heavily populated like that area in Louisiana is.
that's true. Related security question for you, Congressman Babin. Is our region a potential target, and what are the priorities for Congress and Homeland Security to protect our area and our communities safe, keep them safe?
Well, you know, the Homeland Security and just national security in general, I believe, is a huge issue. When I travel around my district, when I talk to people who've come to Washington, one of the biggest concerns I hear is national security, potential terrorism, sabotage, and just worried about their families. And it goes without saying that there are many targets of opportunity in our not only in our country, but also especially in this region, as Gene Green knows full well, because he shares the Port of Houston with me. And it is a huge issue that is so important. We've got a border security problem. There was some classified information that was released fairly recently. I read an op-ed on this just several days ago. This is from Southern Command, who is warning of extremist Sunnis, or Sunni extremists, I should say, whether they're ISIS operatives or other terrorist groups that are coming across the southern border. And so I think it's imperative that we, as our legislative branch and the federal government, start really making some strides to secure our southern border, and couple that with local initiatives to increase our security around soft targets of opportunity. And folks, be on the lookout. Be ever vigilant. See something, report something, because it's a very dangerous situation. Do not have to look any further than our allies in Western Europe to see what happens when you have uncontrolled migration, immigration, refugees that you cannot vet. Our FBI director has told us he cannot possibly vet the people coming in from the war-torn Syria. They've absorbed well over 1 million refugees into Western Europe. The president has already promised to bring in 10,000 Syrian refugees this year, and he's well on his way. He's already allowed in over 8,000. And this is a big issue in the presidential race. I don't know if we're going to get into that later on, but Mrs. Clinton has promised to bring in 65,000 Syrian refugees. And so this is a big issue that I think that the American people are very concerned with and want to see, some careful consideration. We want to be compassionate for our fellow human beings that are being displaced, but on the other hand, our first duty as elected officials when we raise our hands in our swearing in is to uphold the constitutional laws of the country, and national security and the safety of our constituents and citizens is number one, and our critical infrastructure is certainly right up there as well. Monty.
Congressman Green.
Thank you.
Well, I want to agree that our security is important, whether it be in our local neighborhood or nationwide. But a lot of the information that I don't know if I receive, even though I'm on Energy and Commerce Committee, and if we can talk presidential politics if we want to, but obviously we'll have a choice in November, and we'll see what happens. But I was over the break, I got to go to visit both Israel for 2 days and Jordan 2 days. The state of Jordan has assimilated 1 million Syrian refugees. And they're not all in the camps. They're actually in the country trying to jobs. So, again, we can't do background checks on everyone, but we can sure do interviews and make sure that whoever comes here. But our country has brought in refugees from every conflict that's been in the world because, again, that's what our country is. People come from everywhere to enjoy us. So we need to make sure they're vetted, but also just to say we're not going to take refugees from Syria. These are families, these are small children, just not reasonable, that there needs to be a process, and there is a process that's been in effect not only in this administration, but even under previous presidents.
Can I just make one addition to that? We have information that, of course, we have refugee camps scattered around. The UN is running, I think, almost 100% of those, and we are already helping a lot of these folks in these refugee camps. And I would say we want to open our door to people who are less fortunate, who are being displaced by evil terrorist organizations like the Assad regime or ISIS or anyone else. But we actually, for the price of bringing one of these refugees on the path to citizenship into this country, we have information that we can help 12 or more in these safe zones. And my heart goes out to these people. I really do. But I just look at Western Europe and the problems they're having. And I've introduced legislation. I've got a bill, H.R. 3314, which would put a pause on the refugee program. We've had a refugee program was signed into law by President Carter in 1980, and its purpose was to help folks, victims of communism. And it was funded at $200 million a year. Well, we don't really know what this refugee program is costing us today, but we know it's well in excess of $1 billion, and that's annually. And my bill would pause the program until, if and when, we can vet these people properly. The certification by the agencies that do the vetting, and then also find out, let the GAO do a national security assessment and a cost assessment to find out what it's costing us, because over 90% of these refugees are already on federal entitlement programs when they come here. And as I said earlier, we are helping them in these camps. So I hear exactly what you're saying, Gene, but I think when I think about my grandchildren and you folks' children and grandchildren, do we want to open the door to what we've seen in Western Europe? I think we need to be very, very cautious, and that's why I introduced this bill.
Thank you both for your commentary on that critically important topic. Congressman Green, you've always been a strong voice for our community and for the petrochemical industry. Thank you for your decade-long effort working with the chemical industry to pass an update to the nation's primary chemical safety law, the Toxic Substance Control Act, better known as TSCA. The chemical industry really believes that it's good legislation that provides regulatory certainty needed to innovate, grow, create jobs, and win in the global marketplace. After all, the topic today is about the globality of our region as well. And at the same time, provide public health and environmental benefit from strong risk-based protections. How do you feel about the new TSCA Act and the combined community stakeholder effort that resulted in this regulation?
Well, it's a success of this Congress. Again, split Congress, Republican Congress, Democratic president, but this TSCA reforms, we started working on it about 8 years ago, and because it's a 1976 law that has literally outlived its usefulness. EPA said it's not something they can enforce. The industry came to us years ago and said we need to update this so it's current, and it took Congress 8 years and our committee, Energy and Commerce, to be able to do it. But we passed a very bipartisan bill that would update that law. It's good for the industry. About half the environmental groups supported it. And so, but it updates the law and makes it to where EPA will have the authority to test chemicals. They will have the authority to look at close populations, people who live along our fence line, that both Congressman Babin and I represent those areas, so, and also the people who work in those plants. But it'll give a partnership between the chemical industry, or even refining industry in some cases, but mostly chemical. A way we have the updated law, and the President signed it, earlier this year, and like I said, it was a success of working together over a number of years to try and put together a piece of legislation. Again, between the chemical industry, the environmentalists, labor, you name it, everybody had a seat at the table and worked this out. And it's one of the successes of this Congress.
For sure. Congressman Babin, you've also been busy supporting legislation that provides public health and environmental benefit balance with industry and economic growth. You're a co-sponsor for the Ozone Standards Implementation Act. Can you tell us a little bit about that rule, what it'll do, and what's the likelihood that it'll get bipartisan support in both the House and Senate?
Well, I'm one that believes we need to, as you've heard, Gene and I have worked together in my short tenure and his lengthy tenure. I've worked and collaborated with him a number of times. I like to try to work with my colleagues. I especially want to work with the industries that I represent. And we all want clean air, clean water. I'm an outdoorsman, I'm a hunter and a fisherman, and I have a beautiful district that runs all the way up to Jasper and Woodville and Livingston, all the way over to Louisiana. And we want to ensure that we are environmentally safe. However, the EPA, in a number of issues, you're specifically talking about the ozone rule. This is actually so stringent that if and when it's enacted, Yellowstone National Park will not be in compliance. And it's going to be very, very difficult to make the infrastructure changes and the technological changes necessary for Yellowstone to come in compliance. So
By the way, I was there in July. And
Yeah.
I was thinking about that.
Exactly. And and that's just the tip of the iceberg on some of the Clean Power Plan. It's an absolute been a war on coal. My colleagues in Kentucky and West Virginia are really having some hardships up there with their constituents and their companies. A number of these coal companies have actually gone under. Strangely and surprisingly, with so much natural gas that we've had in our state and up through my district, 62% of our electrical generation actually comes in East Texas comes from coal-fired plants. And if this is enacted, and then we're going to see some double-digit increases in families' monthly utility bills. It's going to be a higher cost of doing business. It's going to be tougher to compete globally. And then also the waters of the United States. That's another issue, Monty, where the EPA is redefining what a navigable stream is. For instance, they would even take a tire rut in an agricultural on a farm field and call it a navigable stream. And we all want clean water and we want clean air, and but we have to be reasonable about this, because we know if Yellowstone National Park can't come into compliance with the ozone rule, then it's going to be very, very difficult for Pasadena and Baytown, Orange, Beaumont, Port Arthur, Deer Park, and all the industry that we have down here, the driver of our economic engine, and the Port of Houston and the infrastructure that we depend upon. We're going to have a hard time competing in the marketplaces, and we're going to see a lot of jobs and industry shipped overseas. And that's something that I greatly fear, and we need to, and I sit on some important subcommittees on transportation, and also on the, in my place as a member of some of these subcommittees on the Science Committee. We have had Mrs. Gina McCarthy, the EPA director and some other bureaucrats that have come before us. Very, very difficult to pin these folks down, get specific, concrete answers from them, and we've seen some, I would say, overreach, some very egregious overreach on the part of the EPA in stopping the building of mines, fracking. There's a real tough move on afoot to really make it difficult to continue fracking as well, which has been a huge plus for our economy down here in the state of Texas. So it's something that we're looking and fighting very, very, very hard.
So it's evident that you have some concerns about the EPA. What about TCEQ?
You know, the TCEQ is a state agency, and I believe that no one knows better. I think you folks out there in this audience will agree that we know what's best for the state of Texas. And I think that within reason, the EPA certainly has they've got a great track record. If you go back to Endangered Species Act and cleaning up since the 1960s, done some great things, and we are enjoying them today. We have the cleanest water and air that we've had in decades. But the TCEQ, the state of Texas, I think knows better of our needs and our necessities than somebody who is a distant bureaucracy and inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. So I think the TCEQ needs to be listened to. There has to be collaboration between the two, the feds and the state. But too often we allow the court system to arbitrate in these arguments and discussions and debates, and instead of listening to industry and the states and localities, they base a lot of their court decisions on bureaucracies, unelected officials who pass rules and regulations. I wish I had a picture. I have a picture. I usually hold it up when I have one of my staff come along. Just in the last 18 months, the regulations that have come out of the federal government have been astounding. They completely covered and I've got a big desk in Washington. My desk is covered in regulations that are from the top of this table to about right here, covering up the entire desk, and you can barely see my head sticking out from behind it. And this is what we have to comply with, and this is what we have to abide by and still be able to compete in the world market.
Congressman Green, allow you.
Brian talked about so many things I didn't make the list, but let me talk about ozone. A year ago, there was a bipartisan letter to the EPA because in Texas, we haven't met the current ozone standards. And a lot of it's like the Yellowstone. Welcome to Southeast Texas in August, in summer. We create a lot of our own ozone. And what we've done is it's easier to go after the plants because they're there. The problem we have is with our mobile sources, which is what we drive around. And I disagreed with EPA to raise the standards when we haven't even had a chance to comply with the first standards. Again, in areas like ours, it's going to be difficult. And that needs to be worked on a bipartisan basis. You know, there wasn't a Democratic president who created the EPA. It was Richard Nixon in 1969. So I'm not going to run against the EPA because they're part of what we need to do. They have a job, just like I have a job and Brian has a job to be able to represent our districts. And on the ozone level, there's so many issues we deal with on a daily basis, but that affect our economy. And our main goal is to make sure we have the cleanest environment possible without losing the production we have. I have to admit, I'm not a big coal person. I don't have coal. I have natural gas. And in the industry today, electricity generation, nobody will build a coal plant, not just because of the environmental requirements, because natural gas is so cheap. And it's also cleaner burning than anything but nuclear or wind or solar. And so that's why we're seeing the success we have with energy prices, electricity prices, but also in our chemical industry because natural gas is coming out of South Texas. And so, but again, we want our industry as clean as possible, safe as possible, but we still want those jobs there. And if we didn't produce the product in East Harris County, somebody else would produce it and send it back to us, and they would never produce it as clean as we do today. And we deal with EPA all the time, and that's just part of the job to make sure, just like our industries have to deal with it. And as far as for TECQ being the final version, you know, Texas is part of the United States, and even though as a native Houstonian, native Texan, I like to think that we can do our own, but you know, we need to make sure we work with the federal government, again, no matter who's president, because again, we've had an EPA since 1969 and over different presidents and over the period of time. But like I said, I work with them all the time in the Energy and Commerce Committee to see how we can do to make sure we can get to that clean air without hurting our production capability.
So I understand there's an Ozone Standards Implementation Act that allows the states to pursue cost-effective ways to implement the new ozone regulations. Talk about your support for that.
Well, I think, you know, states are a laboratory. We have 50 states, and they can be a laboratory on how to deal with some of the problems, not only EPA, but lots of other issues. And we ought to give those states a chance to do it, and that's what really EPA does. EPA, you know, you don't get a permit from EPA if you're a plant. You actually get it from TECQ based on federal law that the state has negotiated with the federal government on how we can make that work in our community. So it's actually the state environmental agency who gives you that permit, but it's based on what the national law is and also what the state law is. So it is a partnership between the federal government. EPA is not the enemy, although I have to admit we deal with them. There's a lot of difference between the northeast coast of New England than it is the Gulf Coast in Texas, and I want them to recognize that difference.
That's for sure. So we have about 10 minutes left, so there's one important question that I got to make sure I get in before we run out of time, and so I'll ask both of you to respond to this. What would, you know, tell us your take on the November elections. I'm going to start with Congressman Green. What do you foresee? And what does it mean for, depending on how it goes, for our economy and our citizens?
Well, as y'all know, I've been around a while. I was elected to state legislature in 1972. I first started campaigning in 1968. I was a business major at University of Houston putting up signs for Hubert Humphrey. So this is the most unusual election, and I'm using the nicest terms I can say, compared to 68 or 72 when we had George Wallace on the ballot. Because George Wallace was a very populist. He said whatever he wanted to, and there was a group of folks who agreed with him, and that was probably about 20 or 25%, I guess, back then, particularly in Texas. But you know, I've been a supporter of Hillary Clinton. I supported her in 08 in the Democratic primary, and I support her again. I've worked with her. When, as Democrats, we're in the majority, I get another committee, and typically it's foreign affairs, because I like doing energy work with Latin America, because again, they're our partners, not only our customers, but our partners in energy work. And she's been before the Foreign Affairs Committee when I was on it, and she's sharp as a tack. She's as smart as Bill Clinton, and we all know Bill Clinton's smart, but she's also can be tough as nails. And she's told me no a few times, that I want her to do things, but again, I watched her as a United States Senator running for the Senate in 2000, because here it was, someone grew up in Illinois, First Lady of the Governor of Arkansas, and First Lady of the United States, and she went to New York to run for senator. And if you're a Democrat in New York, you don't really need to go anywhere except to the boroughs and the suburbs of New York City, because that's where the population is. I watched her campaign in 2000 in upstate New York, in areas where that typically a Democrat wouldn't go. And then when she served, she got elected, and then she did that. She worked with those areas. I like people who work across party lines and work across areas that they may not feel comfortable with, and that's what this country ought to be about. And so I think she would be a great president, and I'm hoping she gets elected. You know, nobody is a saint who runs for office. I've served in the legislature and Congress a lot of years, and I've never served with saints. We're all sinners, and everybody's got problems. Although one of the things I will say is that the reason she probably had a separate email, whatever, is that on the federal level, we each carry a federal phone. We cannot use that for any other purpose except our business. And so all of us also carry our personal phone and get emails on it. Now, I can't tell you that my staff knows I may not answer this one, but they will call me on this phone. And so, you know, there's been a lot of issues, and Hillary Clinton's been on the, you know, in the limelight since 1993. And there's been every effort to do whatever they can to diminish her. But I still am looking forward to serving under with her as the Chief Executive of the United States.
Thank you. Congressman Babin.
I wish Mrs. Clinton was in the limelight a little bit more. She has not had a press conference in over 260 days. I'm a Trump fan. I'm supporting Mr. Trump. He certainly, he is not a professional politician by a long shot. He is politically incorrect. He says things that a lot of us are thinking, and the average American really would like to hear and would like to see, and that is the appeal of Mr. Trump. And it's real interesting to see the criticism of Mr. Trump, who cannot have any blame whatsoever on the problems that this nation is facing today, and that Hillary and Barack Obama, and I'll have to throw in many of the establishment Republicans as well over the years. The problems that we're facing today, like open borders, $20 trillion debt. Of course, you can't blame this on Republicans. Obamacare, the hidden taxes, the inability to be able to keep your doctor and your health care policy, escalating premiums, escalating deductibles so high that you can't really even use some of our American workers with children have a hard time even utilizing their health care policies because of the high deductibles. All these problems, not one of them can be laid at the feet of Donald Trump. And it's interesting that he is just far more scrutinized than Mrs. Clinton. And, you know, we're not up here to really advocate for one side or the other, but if you're asking the question, I feel that America has been going in a direction which I feel is detrimental. And people ask me why I ran for Congress. 13 reasons. I have 13 grandchildren, and for the first time, I think, in a long time, if maybe ever, that the average American will say, we're going to leave this. Our next generation will not be as well off as the generation before. And so, for that reason, I think this is the Trump phenomenon. He whipped 16 Republican opponents, and if you'll remember, back in 1980, they were saying that Ronald Reagan couldn't get the nomination, that he could not win the presidency, that he did not have the intellectual capacity or the foreign policy experience to be a good president. He could never win anyway. He showed, the American people stood up and showed the establishment how the cow ate the cabbage. And quite frankly, I'm going to predict the same thing. I may have to eat these words, but I feel like there's a lot of similarities between 1980 and 2016. So that's my take, my 2 cents, Monty.
Thank you.
Can I give you salt and pepper?
You bet.
You know, regardless, what's for sure is that this is in 3 months' time, or less than 3 months, this is a much anticipated election. And more importantly, certainly for most of us, is what changes in January when the new chief executive officer comes in to run the country. So I have time for a question for each one of you, one more, and then we'll wrap up. So this is near and dear to our industry and the region. It's about workforce. So Congressman Green, you've been a long time advocate for workforce training, which is critical in our industry, and your support for both San Jacinto and Lee colleges is very noteworthy. Can you tell us some of the steps you are taking to continue to advance workforce development to the forefront of congressional support, including the status of the Maritime and Energy Workforce Technical Training Enhancement Act, and explain to the audience the significance of that bill?
Well, workforce training has changed over the decades. And I think it was 3 years ago we had our Secretary of Labor here that came to San Jacinto College. And he was originally from Maryland, and he did job training and workforce development in Maryland. And Secretary Perez said back then we would train, and then we would pray there was a job we trained for. We can't do that today. And what's happening in Lee College, San Jacinto College, and I'm hoping part of HCC, and at least the part of HCC that I have, will do what Lee and San Jacinto has done to partner with the industry. And on that day he was here at San Jac Central Campus, he was amazed at the partnership between, in this case it was Shell and Lyondale, there helping write the curriculum so those students, when they get that certification or they get that associate's degree, can actually walk onto a plant and have that kind of skill to be able to go to work. And that's what we need to do. And now HCC is trying to, because they do that, and I like to see it in our district because the skilled workforce is what we need. And again, you can support a family very well by working at one of our plants. And so I'm not on the Education and Workforce Committee, but I will do everything I can to help make sure it happens, because including Department of Labor grants to encourage it, because we need to train people for the skills that are today, not the skills that were a year ago or 10 years ago.
And we appreciate both of your strong advocacy for workforce, because you're both champions in that space. Last question, Congressman Babin. We'll put this one to you about transportation. You toured the RailWorks Texas facility in Deer Park, I believe, to learn about freight rail. As we've heard, we've invested $50 billion in the industry here. There's that's really good, except we have all of this additional transportation needs coming with all those additional pounds of product that we make from that investment. So a major portion of our region needs is infrastructure development, rail, roadway, bridges, utilities, and more. What can Congress do to promote or incentivize infrastructure development, whether it's transportation, roads, or bridges?
Well, we want a robust intermodal transportation infrastructure. And that's why I sought to be appointed to the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. In fact, I rode on an airplane one time early in my career with Gene, and I told him that was what I was after, and he said, "Good. We want some more Texans, especially some Houstonians, to be on that committee." And I feel like that let me tell you, it's a tall order to spend billions of dollars on needed infrastructure when you have nearly a $20 trillion national debt. Because as a conservative, I believe in balancing the checkbook. So we're going to have to prioritize our spending on programs and prioritize these programs. But this is absolutely a constitutional duty, interstate commerce and trade of the U.S. Congress, the legislative branch of our government. And so whatever it takes, we're going to have to find the monies in order to get our infrastructure up to snuff. I was very, very fortunate to already have we got an interstate highway authorized in this last bill, which is Interstate 14, U.S. Highway 190, which is an east-west highway that goes right through the upper part of my district. It's called Forts to Ports, and you'll understand why, because it's going to connect Fort Bliss, Texas, all the way across through numerous Air Force bases and Army bases to Fort Gordon, Georgia, and it's going to have southern spurs to come down to the ports of the state of Texas, which Corpus Christi, Port of Houston, Port of Beaumont, Lake Charles, the Mobile, Alabama, New Orleans, and Mobile, and on to the East Coast. But this Forts to Ports is a classic example of what President Dwight D. Eisenhower envisioned for our interstate system. It's great to have it for our economy, but his thought was for national security. He was an old five-star general, and this would be and facilitate in national security or a wartime crisis of getting men and material to and from. And this is going to be a great boon. I don't know if I'll live to see it come to fruition, but it's authorized. And we've had a number of other, we've got an I-69, which is coming up through my district as well, north to south, and out of Houston, which is in the process of being hopefully in the latter stages of completion. But rail infrastructure, as you started out talking about my visit, and these are the kind of things that we must work on. And this is why we need you folks' input, your desires and your wishes, so that we can work on these issues in an effective manner and get them passed, so that we can make our place, our district down here in our part of the great state of Texas a better place to live and work in.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you both. Greatly appreciate the time that you've committed to be here at this forum, and that's because you know how valuable this is to our industry, and appreciate all of the insight and the views that you're providing for us today. And so please stand up and join me in appreciating the Congressman being here today.